Welcome to ESB Outspoken with Angela and Richard Shaw. Today we have a special guest, Peter Sheahan, and Richard is going to introduce him.
Okay, everybody. After decades of standing in the fire with leaders of high-performing organizations, Peter Sheahan has come to believe that an organization will only go commercially where its leaders first go personally. Having grown his own companies by accelerating the growth and transformation for clients that include Apple, Chick-fil-A, De Beers, and AT&T, Peter will provoke you to get bigger by getting better. In being true to his own ambitions and relentless pursuit of growth, Peter's published 7 books, built 3 global companies, and delivered more than 2,500 presentations in 40+ countries. Today, he and his team at Kerrigan's Group are focused exclusively on inspiring leaders to do the hard work required to accelerate growth and transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, our special guest, Peter Sheahan. Welcome, Peter. We are so happy to have you today.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Angela. Great to see you both.
Thank you.
So, Ange?
Okay, so Peter, we're having you on today because you are one of the best in the industry at doing briefing calls, conference calls. So we just thought it would be great for you to give some tips to some of our speakers and our clients. So if you want to just jump in, our first question is, how do you go about preparing for the briefing call?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm going to make one point before I answer that specific question. And it is to actually open both the speaker's mind, the event planner's mind, the bureau and agent's mind, and the end client executive sponsor themselves mind to the value of the briefing process, right? I think sometimes we underestimate just how much impact we can have from the briefing call itself. So for instance, I had an executive say to me a couple of weeks ago that as a result of our 1-hour interaction related to my session at their conference, he was significantly clearer on the actual outcomes he wanted, not just for the event, but for this broader transformation that they were leading their organization on. And so the purpose of the briefing call isn't just to tell a speaker or to understand how many people are in the audience, what's their political affiliation, what are the words they do and don't like to hear. You're really trying to drive to a level of clarity of what outcomes, what objectives, what value needs to get created. And so when you think about that, from a client perspective, you have a chance to have a 1-hour session with what hopefully is a thought leader of some description. And if you are that thought leader or that speaker, you have a chance to get really deep into a client's world. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of that. And as it relates to, if you're an event planner and maybe you're connecting the client through the bureau to the speaker, imagine getting 1 hour of unfiltered insight into your client's situation. Like, would you waste that opportunity to really dive in? And so the prep I want to do before that meeting is firstly through the lens of how impactful can the call be itself, not just in prep for the presentation. And therefore I want to know exactly who's on the call. I want to know enough about their business before I get on that call, but I'm not wasting anyone's time. So my team will pull together a full bio of everyone that's going to be in attendance, particularly the executives that'll be there to really give the meat of the briefing process. 2, we'll probably look at not just the customer's website, but we'll look at a number of blogs in the industry talking about, trends for 2021, trends for 2022. What does the future look like? So we're grounded in what that shift is. So when we get in there, we don't waste 30 minutes going, so what do you guys do? Rather, we're asking the deeper questions,
But, you're obviously you have so many things that you prepare for. What's the one thing that's an absolute must in what you just mentioned? I know it's hard to cut something out, but what is it that you say you absolutely have to do before you get on a call?
It's essentially to know what the macro and external trends are that are changing that business, right? Or if it's an association, that vertical, that sector, yeah? Because if I know what is disrupting them and what change they're facing, then there's no shortage of your ability as a speaker, and ideally, in my case, someone with deep research and expertise, there's no shortage of my ability to adapt and match that to their world. And even if you're like a mountain climber and you do the same speech pretty much every time, there is an expectation from the client that you are landing that in their world. And so rather than just go, quote unquote, when you face adversity or when your back's to the wall, you should be able to reference what those things are. And so that would be the prep I would absolutely do before a briefing call, because even if the briefing call was a total bomb, you knowing those things just made you that much better prepared for your presentation anyway.
When you come at it truly understanding what the client's all about and you've relayed it so nicely to their world, have you noticed just an incredible positive feedback coming from them during the call? Is that almost immediate?
Yeah, I think you do a couple of things, right? One is at most briefing calls with me, the client's pretty uncomfortable actually for most of the call, because I'm asking them questions that they haven't necessarily done the work to figure out yet, right? So, you say to a client, what's going on? Like, we're facing massive change and disruption. And then I'll go, tell me the 6 behavioral changes you need to see in your organization to respond to that. And they're like, well, we need collaboration. I'm like, yeah, but what does that look like? Is that cross-functional? Is that within? And all of a sudden they start, feeling almost underprepared themselves. But you're not doing that in an adversarial way. You're doing that to co-create what the clarity we both need is to be successful. So just that process is consultative of sorts. So I think you start to get that feedback, which is like, wow, we haven't really answered these questions. To which my point would be, well, you probably should. And don't just brief me, but brief everyone else that's going to hit that platform. 2, you immediately alleviate their fear that you're kind of just making it up, right? Like, people really do want speakers with depth these days. And when you start asking intelligent questions, just by the fact that you want to know the answer to that question, you start to alleviate that tension. And I'd say the third area is after the call, where they go back to their CEO and go, we are so confident and excited about who we've got. You avoid the chance for 3 or 4 more calls, or, when clients start micromanaging you and go, can you actually send us a copy of your speech? That does not ever happen to me. Like, they leave the call going, that guy's got it. He's got right? This. Yeah. And so there's value, not just in the call as a speaker, but it relieves friction and tension in the process of preparation.
Awesome.
Well, and to me, it kind of opens their minds of other things that you could do for them in the future. So, I mean, to me, it really opens you up to more business, because you're pushing them and asking them questions that later they're going to say, hey, well, maybe we need to bring Peter back to help us with this. So
I didn't want to say that, Angela. I didn't want to say that, because the number one, so let's get into the nuance of that. All right.
Okay.
So the number one complaint, I did a bunch of research, as you both might remember, around the relationship between the bureau or the agency, who's essentially their trusted advisor, and the event planner and/or economic buyer. And one of the number one frustrations they had was speakers selling on the briefing call. They're like, we're already paying you X thousands of dollars to show up and be at our event. Don't try and flog me books or flog me your training program before you've even delivered the presentation, right? And so I would strongly advise people not to think of the briefing call as a business development opportunity. But I have sold tens of millions of dollars of consulting on briefing calls, because it is a business development opportunity. But the path to that sale is through credibility and value, right? Like, if you add enough value to an executive on a briefing call, you ask them those sorts of questions, you don't need to sell them anything. They're coming to you going, can you help me with that? Right? To which my response is, yeah, after we nail this first event, then we can talk, like, it's to me, I don't want to get too much mess in that environment. But yes, there is definitely a business development opportunity that comes out of it. But the paradox is, if you approach it like that, you're probably going to destroy any chance for that happening.
Well, that's true.
That. Yes.
And that kind of brings up something that Angela and I've talked about before, is what is the worst thing that a speaker can do during the call? You're talking about all the preparations and whatever. You mentioned kind of overselling on the front, but what is truly the worst thing that they can do to really get a bad impact from the call in the long run?
Yeah, I would say there's 2 sides of that coin for me. It's when either after all of that executive time or client time gets invested, 50, 55 minutes, and you get to the end of the call and you basically feed back to them the off-the-shelf, non-customized version of what you're going to do, which basically feels to the client like, I just gave them all that information just so they could tick a box for me, but ultimately this person is not going to do the work, right? And so one is you don't actually integrate into your thinking in that moment, the things that that client's talking about, right? Or two, you try and force the client's answers to your questions into your map of the world rather than genuinely listening to theirs. So if they feel like you're railroading them into delivering what you always do, then that's going to instantly destroy credibility. It's going to make them feel frustrated. It's going to make them question the value of the economic exchange. And so I think that's the biggest mistake people make, beyond stupid things like swearing or making political statements or being
Right.
late.
You've seen it all.
Yeah, I mean, we have literally seen it all. But I think, assuming a base level of sophistication, I would say that's the biggest mistake. I mean, when I do a briefing call, it's 55 minutes of nothing but me asking questions. And if I'm really listening, then in that last 5 minutes, I can feed back to them an approach to their brief that, is even more what they want than they knew how to articulate when they got on that call. And I'm happy if we've got time to dive into what are those sorts of questions that get you there. But in terms of the ratio, I mean, I'm a 95-5 guy. I mean, I was talking to a great speaker on the weekend. He's like 70-30 in the way he approaches this sort of stuff. But the ratio should definitely be a dominant question and answer with you leading the discovery, with much less of you going, oh my gosh, yeah, I do that all the time. Or let me tell you about my great signature story. Or no, like just don't waste that opportunity to learn. And by the way, it blows my mind that event planners and agents don't join these calls. I mean, we're constantly craving greater intimacy with our economic buyer. And here you have these 1 hour opportunities where if you've got a good speaking partner, you are going to learn a lot about that client.
I love
that.
that.
Is absolutely great.
That's a great point. And it's interesting, we were talking about, I've been on calls where I've seen speakers just jump in and start talking about how their message is going to fit without ever asking a question. And I think it's very frustrating, because then 15, 20 minutes later, you realize that the client wanted something totally different than the speaker was telling them they needed. And it's such a big disconnect. So I love that you really spend all that time digging and asking questions.
Well, think about it this way, Angela. By the time you're on a briefing call, they've probably watched your video already. They know you can speak. They know you're funny. They're paying, in some cases, significant amounts of money for you to be there. They're not worried about your ability to entertain their audience, right? They are worried about your ability to do it in a way that actually creates value, that's matched and aligned to their association members' needs, to their sales teams, whoever the audience is. And so it's actually, you're just showing a level of naivety if you're in that call, being the dominant voice. It just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Well, I think it's got to be a level of confidence too. If you're confident as a speaker in your own skin, then you're confident to hand over the controls of the call to the client. And I think that's
well, hang on. No. I never hand over the control of the call to the client. I hand over, definitely do not, because they'll meander around the bush. Like, I mean, you'll get nowhere in an hour, right? And you'll end up having to do 4 of them. I control it. I mean, I don't know if you can see this on the video, but this is a copy of my typical memo before a presentation. It's 30 pages. And the majority of the framework of that comes from the call. I have a template for how to do the call, by the way. And so I am definitely controlling the call, but I'm not filling the empty space in the call. And that's the slight nuance in the differences between those two things, right?
Do you do a pre-event questionnaire that you send out to clients, or is that something that you send out and ask for information, or do you just do the research and gather as much as you can?
We do the research and gather as much as we can. We do occasionally, depends on our agency partner, send out a questionnaire, but most clients are not that organized and don't want to spend that much time on their email, right?
That's what we've seen.
Yeah, we will send so there's a set of questions that support my sort of template of the key areas I absolutely want to dive into. We will pre-send that. So the client, when the event planner says to EVP of sales, the speaker wants a briefing, and the EVP is like, I don't want to speak at a time. They're like, well, it's really important that we get this aligned. And they go, okay, fine. Here are the questions he's likely to ask. And what often happens when we send that is they might go, you know what, we need the head of strategy on this call. Or we need the head of marketing as well. So you end up with 2 or 3 people rather than just the person who might own the meeting. And so I don't rely on them to fill that stuff out. much more likely to just give them a sense of what it is. With that said, if they do send you that information, read it before you get on the call. I would say the times I've had my least successful briefing calls is when either I didn't see that response or it didn't make it to me, and the client's like, I answered that question already, you know? And so, you know, if you're going to ask for it, make sure you use it when you get it. My goal is to remove friction, not create it. So I'd rather just give them a heads up about what's going to happen and then just run the call.
Well, you had brought this up a couple of times. Let's talk about some of the more key questions that you asked during the call. Could you give us some examples?
Yeah. So what I am trying to do in a briefing call is get the client from an abstract understanding of what they want to a more specific and concrete example of what they want. So they say, we want someone on innovation. I want someone on transformation. I need someone on leadership. Insert topic here. That is of no value to me whatsoever, right? I'm like, okay, what is the transformation? What does it look like behaviorally? What are the cultural barriers to that? What will your audience believe and not believe about your commitment to that transformation? What's the elephant in the room? The thing, you tried this transformation 2 years ago and it didn't, that's what I'm trying to bring them down, what we call the ladder of abstraction, to a level of specificity, right? And so the areas I'm going to ask questions are, number one, what's happening contextually in the industry, in the business? We just acquired another company. We just got acquired by another company. We're seeing marketplaces and Amazon eat our margins. Consumers have got a whole new set of preferences that we don't know how to meet, right? Give me the big picture changes. So that's what I would call like context. Okay. So as an organization, where are you going? In response to this changing marketplace, where are you taking the group? That's things like, what's your value proposition going to look like? How is the organization changing? Are there shifts in your underlying business model? Now, by the way, I might not talk about any of these things, but I want to know what they are so I can pick the right case studies to subliminally give third-party credibility to the journey of transformation and change they're going on, right? So I'm still at a contextual level. I haven't even asked about the event yet, right? Then I'm going to go into, okay, so why are you having this event? Well, this is a chance to get our salespeople kicked off, have them excited about the new agenda. This is a chance for us to build relationships with clients. And so I'm diving into the event objective, but I'm not just saying, what's your objective? I'm saying, all right, if you could get 3 shifts in the behavior of your audience, what would they be? What shared language would you like? What current initiatives have you got underway in the organization that you would like this event to give credibility to? What's a new program that your partners can adopt and opt into that you'd like them? So I'm like, it's not just what's the objective. There's at least 6 questions that I might be able to ask underneath that. And then notice I'm coming down. What are the changes? What does it mean for my organization? What is this event supposed to achieve? Now I'm coming deeper into that specificity. I'm like, tell me about my session. What does success look like? What are you most hoping I'd be able to address? How does that relate to the other sessions that you got going on? Boom, boom. So now I'm getting clear on my objective. And then I'm saying, what's the right word for this? What are the risks in this event?
Okay.
Don't call them a broker. They're a financial professional. Do not use the word XYZ. People hate it when you say that. Oh my gosh, this guy came in last time and so I do get to a level of tactical around like, what are the do's and don'ts in this space? But that's after I've come all the way down in this direction. So like I do get to delivery risks and, how many people are, and then I do want to know about the audience. I know we're probably short on time here, but I want to know, what are their decision-making rights and responsibilities? Like, what are they actually able to get done? What does a day in the life look like for these people? How can I be compassionate to the environment within which we're asking them to make these changes, et cetera? And so that's kind of the process. We just bring them down that funnel. And then, if I've done that well, there's 3 or 4 minutes left and I go, here's what I heard. Boom, boom, boom. Here's how I'm going to approach that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then usually the client's like, wow, that was great. Can you send us that on an email? We need that for our own brief, like that's sort of how that happens.
Love it. That's
awesome.
Great. I know we talked a little bit about having a few people on the call. Is there a set number that you don't want to go over? Because I know there's times when there's 10 people on the call and it seems like it gets a little out of control. So is there a number that you kind of like to stay within?
I mean, I prefer 2 to 3 max.
Okay.
I make sure the event planner our bureau partner or the logistics manager at our bureau partner knows that this call is not about that. I'm not going to spend my time talking about flights and what hotel I'm staying in. I'll let my team take that offline. And so you might have 6 people on it, but 3 of them are just there for, to listen in, right?
Taking notes.
I'm not doing an AV conversation in this call, And so I would say the 2 to 3 people is plenty. If there are 6 or 7, then the goal of the call isn't just a briefing. The goal of the call is to get everybody on board in that larger group, right? Yeah. And so I'm not going to get upset if a client brings 6 or 7 people on it. If you've got an association board, or you've got an event committee, I'm going to do the right thing and really play to that group. And if I will bounce the questions around them and go, Lynn, you said this really interesting thing. What do you think about that? And I'll have Lynn comment and then have other people fill the gaps. And I'll be like, Bill, you made this. And so I'll bring all of those people in so they feel like they had a voice, because that's part of the client's goal if they're bringing that many people on. And then as long as I can get to the end and feedback, I'm comfortable with that. You know what I was thinking about while we're talking about this, there's both the briefing call, but there's the pre-confirmation call too, right? Like where the client is thinking and tossing up between 2 or 3 speakers. And that's a slightly different approach. And I don't know whether that's for this podcast or another, but sometimes there are more people on the sales call than there are the briefing call, because you have decision by committee sort of stuff going on.
Well, tell us about that though, real quick, because you brought up that topic. So I want to go into that, because pre-decision calls really are key in this whole process. And as you say, it's a different approach. And I know that you've had great success with pre-decision calls. You get on a call, they usually book you. So what is it that you're doing in these calls that other speakers may not be doing as well?
I think it's a couple of things. Number one is I still do all the same prep for a pre-sales call as I do for a briefing call. I know who's on the call. I know their previous jobs. I know where they went to university. I know what's happening in the industry. I know the challenges the organization faces. Like we'll do all of that before we get on. I'll spend the first 10 to 12, it's usually a 30-minute call in my experience. I'll spend the first 10 to 12 minutes of that call doing exactly what we just described. I'm not asking about the weather. I don't care where they live at this point. I'm like, tell me about this shift. Tell me about this shift. And instead of going, what's changing? I'll say something like, so my understanding is a big shift from product-based marketing to vertical-based selling. How is that impacting your industry? And I'll ask them questions that I've already pre-developed that I know talk to their challenges. And I'll have them answer that. And now there's 2 outcomes there. One is they're like, wow, this guy really understands what we're facing. And 2 is we just spent the whole time like really talking about real stuff, and we haven't even heard from him yet about his approach, and that actually makes them feel comfortable because they now feel like they're dealing with an expert, not dealing with a performer, right? Then at about that 12, 15-minute mark, I'll be like, look, the reason I've dived into this is I have no interest in doing a cookie cutter presentation. If we do this work together, I'm going to put you through like at least an hour of these sorts of questions before I even decide what I'm going to do. Let me tell you the areas of expertise I've got, just so you know where I can land in your world. But until such time as we really dive into this, I'm not prepared to declare exactly what I would do. And so then we get into a discussion about 2 or 3 areas of expertise, which is really all I've got. And out of that, I say things like, which of those do you think you most need? And they'll be like, wow, my gosh, that accelerated growth piece, that's what we really want. And then we might do 5-7 minutes in there, which is still more Q&A. And so what they're getting an experience of is the depth and commitment I have to really understanding their need. Because again, if I'm on a sales call and, Richard, you've recommended me to them, that you are their pre-qualifier. You're not going to put anyone up there that's not great. This is not about can you speak, it's do you fit? And so, now I'm 25 minutes in it at this point. And then my close question is, this call is about giving you the information you need to make a decision. What other information can I give you to help you make a decision? Tell me the other speakers you're looking at. I'm happy to tell you where their strengths are and how I can't do that. And I'm pretty direct on a sales call. I'm like, if you want this, this, and this, I'm not your guy. But if you want this, this, and this, I am. And I also disqualify myself pretty quickly from the opportunities that don't fit. And I'll like, if they go, yeah, we're talking to Speaker A, I'm like, oh my gosh, my favorite thing about Speaker A is one, two, and I'll make sure I elevate those people as well. And usually honestly, I think in 20 years, I've missed 1 or 2 sales calls. And one of them I got this sounds a little overconfident, but one of them I got the year after, and the other one I lost for diversity reasons. And so I'm kind of feeling okay about that.
Yeah, that's right.
If you give them experiences that are reflective of an expertise, consultative experience, that's just so refreshing. Like, I love that you're doing this podcast, because doing this well is the differentiator at the end of the day.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is the biggest differentiator.
Yes, it is the biggest differentiator.
Let's just say that quickly 3 times.
Yeah,
it was so easy. I do have to mention, so though you probably have run into this, because I've seen it before, is where probably some of your buddies are competing against you in these situations. You're asking them, and maybe they come back and they say, oh, Ryan Estes is also being considered for this. How do you handle that kind of situation? You handle it the same way if you're dealing with a buddy versus somebody that you just know that's on the circuit?
So firstly, the pie's big enough as far as I'm concerned, right? And if you mention Ryan Estes, Josh Linkner, Seth Madison, Kendra Hall, Mel Robbins, I'm going to be like, well, let me first say, no matter which one of us you pick, it's going to be a success, right? Like, just de-risk that for the client. If they said, Ryan, I'd be like, if you're looking for someone that really understands sales and leadership, he's way better at that than I am. And if it's genuinely a better fit for Ryan, I'll literally push the client in that direction, to be honest. And so I'm just not worried about scarcity. I know that Ryan will do it this year, I'll do it next year, or I'll do it this year. And they'll be like, who do you recommend? I'll be like, well, go back to Ryan, Angela can connect you. You're already on that journey. I don't know. I've been at this 20 years. I have done thousands of presentations. What you miss this summer, you get next. And I just am not in the business of putting anyone else down. It just doesn't work, especially not, that example's what a phenomenal presenter. Like,
oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
I know we've got some good speakers out there.
Oh, there is no doubt.
I know. One of the things that I always use when selling you is when customers have you come and speak, it's like you work there because you've spent so much time getting to know that client. It's people in the audience probably think you work there.
Yeah.
That's
actually,
because of all
sometimes
the background that you do.
Yeah. Sometimes you can take that too far, and they're like, wait, does he work here? And you're like, no. But the way I feel about that, Angela, is I think it honors the client. Like, if 350 people are going to take a half a day of their life and sit in a room while I take them on a journey, the least I can do is understand their world.
Yes.
And I guess, if you are, I use the mountain climber as the metaphor, but if you are the mountain climber, you might be listening to this going, do you really do all that work? And I'm like, yeah. And could you imagine if you were the one mountain climber that did do all that work? Like that level? There's plenty of people that were Navy SEALs. There are plenty of people that, overcome adversity. Like, this is a differentiator, right? In my world, I don't want to do the job if I don't I'm not there to do a tap dance and make you laugh. I will make you laugh, but I will make you hurt and cry at the same time, right? in an intellectual way. And so I'm in the business of accelerating transformation and growth in organizations, period. And I know keynote speaking is a powerful catalytic experience when it's done right. And I wouldn't want to, dishonor the audience, but I also wouldn't want to dishonor my own work. There's plenty of other things I could be doing with my time. And if I'm going to invest as well for both of our sort of integrity, for want of a better word, we should be doing that work. And by the way, I feel the same about clients. Like, when I get on a briefing call and a client doesn't know how to articulate what he or she wants, I don't let them off the hook with that. Like, I will do a second and third briefing call until they know the answer, because they owe it to their audience and they owe it to their team if they're going to put them in a room for a day. And so, I guess I just have high standards around that stuff.
Well, I think
I love that. There's a lot of clients that don't prepare.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think one of the things that I've been listening very closely to everything you said through here, and one of the key things throughout is you have a clear plan, whether it's a pre-decision call, whether it's a pre-event call, no matter who the client is, you have a plan. And that's what puts you a step or two ahead of a lot of other people who are doing conference calls, because they are not going into it with as well thought out plan is what we've just heard you take us through.
Yeah, that's right.
And
so what can we do? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that plan, I have a plan that's going to take 7 hours, not 1. but it's modularized in a way. So I can bet, like, because you don't know exactly after the first 3 questions, you might be in a completely different direction than you thought. And so that plan is a deep and wide level of preparation. So I can let go of 80% of it and just do the 20 that matters.
Is there one last thing that you would like to impart to the people who are listening to this podcast to say, what piece of advice, both for clients and speakers, that you would like to impart that you have not already mentioned previously?
Yeah, the goal of this call is not to quote unquote convince the client that what you were already prepared to do is the right thing. The goal of this is to deepen all of your understandings about the role of the meeting, the role of your session, and the potential value that can be created. And just that level of understanding, even if you're not a customizer as such, you won't be able to help but have it filter through your thinking and filter through the way you position and frame your own stories. And so connect to that value and don't underestimate how powerful the call itself will be for the people who are involved, not just you as a speaker.
Awesome.
Love it.
Awesome.
Wow. This has been fantastic. I've learned a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. You have taught people a lot of things, and we're going to make sure that we probably have as much of this as possible out there.
That's right.
So it's really good, because what I always say is when I hear from a speaker and I actually learn something, that's when I know it's been highly effective. So we thank you for all that.
Yes. Thank you so much. We're excited. And I know it's going to help some of our speakers and our clients be more prepared for their next call.
And as a result, help their companies and their events.
Yes.
Which is what we all want them to do. So thank you, Peter.
You're welcome. Thank you both.